Hello, good morning. I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Monday, June 9th.
And this is the Playbook podcast. Good morning. Dasha, you're back in DC. Welcome home.
I am back in DC. The sister has graduated, and a lot is going on here in Washington, and actually where I just came from in California.
Yeah, right. You should have stayed in California where the action is, right?
Yeah, if I were still in broadcast news, I would be out there with a microphone right now, but instead I'm sitting with a microphone in here.
And I am in the weird bunker basement of my new house that I've literally just moved into. There are boxes piled everywhere, and I'm sat against this white brick wall in the basement with nothing around me. It's kind of like a dungeon.
Are we all invited to your housewarming, Jack?
You are in 2027 when we finally finished unpacking all 167 boxes.
Godspeed.
Before we talk about what's driving the day, I need to talk to you about last Friday, when the whole Elon Musk thing was going completely nuts.
Oh, yeah, that whole thing.
I woke up on Saturday morning to find that you just had a chat with the president. And I read this story. It's like it just casually slips in that Dash has just had this call with the president of the United States. And I'm like, so how does that work? How do we go from you saying, oh, I'm chasing these leads to interview with the president? Do you want to just give me some sense of how that happens? Because I have no clue how you get on an interview with him at such short notice.
I wish I could tell you I'm like some magical reporter that has a secret sauce. No, I just called him. And then a bunch of other reporters in our business also called him. I mean, we've talked about this a million times, but for all of his gripes about the press and all of the angry posts and the changes at the White House, this is still the most accessible president in history. And he will occasionally, when you call him, just pick up the phone and have a brief chat.
Amazing. All right, let's get on with the day. Everyone knows what the big story driving the day today is. It's been the big story driving the day over the weekend. The situation in Los Angeles was still moving very fast last night and into the night. And indeed, as we're recording this podcast, Donald Trump deploying the National Guard in Los Angeles concerning the protests there over the ICE raids that happened on Friday. Let's get into that in a minute, Dasha. It's the biggest story of the day. Let's flag two other things that people should be across, as well as that, which is obviously going to continue to dominate headlines through the day. It being Monday, second thing we should talk about, the big, beautiful bill, as it is literally called, is still moving through Congress despite Elon Musk's best efforts. And the Senate will be back today from the weekend away. These GOP leaders there, it's such a fragile process that they're trying to tiptoe the way through. And Elon Musk just hurled himself into it last week, Dasha. They must be pretty stressed about that.
It is just the worst time for the world's most powerful man and the world's richest man with the biggest megaphone to be going at it, and for that very rich man with a very big megaphone to be dumping on this bill at crunch time. One thing that I've heard from some of my sources on the Hill is that Musk isn't going to damage Trump. Like, if all of the mountains of litigation and all of the accusations and all of that has not damaged him, he's Teflon Don, put that aside. However, he can damage his agenda. And that's because it's not like the Republican Party is like gung-ho, fully in unison on the Hill right now. If he decided to really push and either pressure lawmakers, or if they still want to choose Trump, he could still do quite a lot to damage public opinion of certain aspects of the bill or of the bill itself. And then that becomes also increasingly complicated for lawmakers.
I say this very tentatively in the knowledge that these things change very quickly. Seems like Elon's kind of chilled it out over the weekend. It seemed that way. We're possibly not going to be quite so attacky on this bill this week, do you think?
Yeah, so the latest that I'm hearing, there was a phone call between representatives for Trump, representatives for Musk on Friday. They have agreed that the ceasefire is holding. Let's do everything to keep the ceasefire holding. Neither of them really wanted to put down the arms, but for now, they have. So everyone is kind of holding their breath. I mean, there's a lot at stake for all of the players around these two. Like, nobody wants this brawl to be happening except the people on the internet that are having just the best time with the memes. But in terms of, the stakes for the White House and for the Hill and for Republicans at large, like, this is not good. So everyone's doing what they can to keep the temperature down, though everyone has said these are two very unpredictable individuals, so we just don't know.
The hilarious thing about when I hear you say a phone call between representatives of Elon Musk and representatives of Donald Trump is that could just be a call between Stephen Miller and Katie Miller, right? Like, literally a married couple could just talk to each other about what's going on between these guys.
to be a fly on the wall in that household.
Let me just flag one more headline before we get into the biggest issue at hand, which is the economy. Really big thing happening behind the scenes today, and actually back in London, is that the US trade representatives and the Chinese trade representatives are getting together for another round of trade talks. And that probably won't be something that we see a lot of today, but is a really, really important moment. The conversation around trade between the US and China has kind of shifted a bit over the last few weeks. We were just talking about tariffs, exports.
Yeah.
Now it's actually about export controls, right? And critical minerals and the stuff that makes the batteries and the iPhones and all the stuff that American modern life and indeed the military relies on.
Right. Rare earths, all of that stuff.
Exactly. And it feels like the conversation's suddenly become a bit more complex.
Absolutely. And this is what the economy wonks and our great economic reporters have been talking about, that there are a lot of other pieces to trade negotiations that go beyond tariffs. And that is actually the stuff that's even harder to work out because it's so nuanced and it's so different with every country, which is why there was so much skepticism that they could make these deals so quickly, because it's not just 10%, 50%, whatever. There are all of these other factors that would be smart for the White House to negotiate on. It's just complicated.
Let's get into the main story of the day. It's been dominating the news over much of the weekend, Dasha. We've seen a third night of protests in Los Angeles. Basically, what happened if you've been away over the weekend or doing something else over the weekend is that there were ICE raids in Los Angeles on Friday, in downtown Los Angeles, which very quickly drew protesters, drew people trying to stop the ICE agents from doing what they were doing. And that has escalated. There were people coming out into the streets through the weekend. Where we are right now is we're seeing cars being set on fire. We're seeing videos of people throwing rocks through passing car windows, smashing cars with bats and things like that, people waving flags, and very, very quite extreme scenes. And then, of course, Donald Trump announced that he has now deployed the National Guard there over the head of Gavin Newsom, the state governor. And it's the first time that's happened in 60 years in the United States. A really tense, violent moment happening right now.
Yeah, the last time was Lyndon Johnson during the Selma protests, and he deployed National Guard troops to actually protect the demonstrators from violence. So this is a very rare tool used by presidents.
President Trump described it as a violent insurrectionist mob. He said LA has been invaded and occupied. Stephen Miller, who we just mentioned, the White House aide, describing Los Angeles as a, quote, occupied territory. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, saying that the protests were being managed by the LAPD and that it's President Trump escalating the situation, and now by threatening to deploy roughly 500 active duty Marines to the streets of Los Angeles. And Gavin Newsom urging people in LA to be peaceful. He says, remain peaceful and not to fall into the trap that the extremists are hoping for. And by that, I assume he means Trump and Miller and co. Let's talk about the politics of that, because that's what we're here to do, Dasha. It's not surprising to me that a moment like this has happened. It felt like we were always going to get to this point, you know, like given what Donald Trump was pledging to do during his election campaign and given how he said he would respond to protests. I guess it felt like we'd always get here in a way.
Yeah. And this is reminding me so much of the George Floyd protests in 2020 and thinking about how we got from there to here. It was in the aftermath of the death of George Floyd that the parties started to really diverge on the political spectrum. The left moved more left, the right moved more right. That was when Democrats were talking about defunding the police, right? When there was really the rise of DEI culture in corporations as a response to an outcry from a lot of Americans and a lot of Americans of color. Then you saw a really significant backlash to all of what the progressive left developed in the aftermath of that movement, and the right capitalizing on it. And now the entire tone of the response to these protests, I mean, the rhetoric so very quickly becoming so high, so extreme, so heated from the White House of using the words rebellion, using insurrection, occupied territory. That has happened really quickly compared to the response in 2020. And it's kind of remarkable to take a step back and trace the connection and the connective tissue to where these parties have gone. And you see Democrats now having felt that backlash in a very tough spot right now of how to respond, how to talk about these protests and the parts of the protests that have become violent. And how do you respond when you want to resist Trump, you want to oppose, but you don't want to piss off your sort of average citizens that don't love the idea of violence in their city, but you also want to respect the movement and the resistance. It's messy. It's messy for Democrats, but it seems to be pretty black and white for the White House right now.
To me, one big difference between the previous incidents you're talking about, there was such an outpouring of emotion and anger when people saw what happened to George Floyd and the video of that.
Absolutely.
This time it's a little bit different. The raids that started this were not particularly being captured on video. The truth is that Donald Trump's immigration policies are broadly supported by the American people. A lot of people don't like them. I don't mean everyone supports them, but if you look at the polling, that is the area of policy where he is most popular, where people are most supportive of what he is doing. And that still remains the case today. And therefore, he will feel on much stronger ground in terms of public opinion to be doing what he's doing now. And as you say, when you see the scenes that we've seen on Sunday night playing out on people's TVs, and people see these guys in masks standing on cars, smashing them in, setting fire to them, most people will look at that and want that to be quelled. And I think Donald Trump will feel confident that he has a majority of public support behind him for what he's doing, even though I'm very aware that many people hearing me say that will be furious because they absolutely hate what's happening. I'm not sure that's where the majority of public opinion is. And I think that in a way, almost the White House have been waiting for a moment like this, and they see an opportunity here and they look like they're seizing it to me.
They do see an opportunity. And of course, it's coming at a time when the news cycle has not been favorable to President Trump. And this is an opportunity for him to project strength and bring the hammer down. They are not shying away from looking tough and aggressive in this moment. It doesn't seem like there's concern that they're going to go overboard here, although that is the risk, right? Because there is precedent to when you start to make the streets of a city look like a war zone, things can get bad. So there's the politics and then there's the practical reality. But look at New York City, where a lot of protesting took place in the summer of 2020. And it looked like there was this huge progressive wave. And then they ended up electing a mayor who was a cop. And by no means the leftist progressive that a lot of the progressive Dems are hoping for. So politically, this is tricky.
You're completely right. And you make a really important point. These things can escalate so fast. And it's pretty clear that Trump and Miller and the rest of them are very happy to escalate this. Well, these things can get out of hand very, very quickly when you do that. And no one quite knows now how this is going to play out. And I don't want to speculate about it, but you don't know where it goes from here. And that's really important.
You have a pressure cooker politically and on the ground in very, very real terms. And there's a politicking up here, and then there's the reality down here. And sometimes you don't know whose face that could blow up in. And perhaps I shouldn't use those kinds of terms because there is real danger for a lot of people in LA right now.
Let's try and talk about something slightly more lighthearted than violence and military on the street, shall we? And we always try and end this podcast with something a little bit more fun. You've been the one who's been traveling around doing something fun. Tell me something fun from your weekend, Dasha.
Jack, I wanted to force your hand into talking about one of the most epic matchups in sports. Carlos Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner in the French Open. 5 hours and 29 minutes of smacking a tennis ball around back and forth. These two could not have been more even. I mean, Jack, I cannot stand for 5 hours and 29 minutes, let alone run around a court. I mean, just the athleticism alone and the endurance was crazy. But these are two young, early 20s tennis pros, number one and number two in the world. And they are this new era of the sport. And they're young and they're such sweet guys. And they were so perfectly matched. I mean, they went to deuces like a bajillion times. They were both fighting against odds that were not favorable to them. Sinner had never won a match over 4 hours. Alcaraz had never come back from 2 sets to love down. And they both outmatched themselves and each other. Alcaraz ultimately won. I was on a plane. Okay, you're going to have to cut me down here because it's too much, I know. But I was on a flight And like everybody in the rows next to me was watching, and we were all standing up and cheering and sitting down and groaning and screaming all at the same time. It was the plane had to circle around extra because there was bad weather in DC, but we were all grateful for it because we just wanted to keep watching the match. It was like the best cross country flight I've ever had.
I love it. There you go, from 30,000 feet. Dasha Burns there auditioning for a role on the commentary at the Summer Olympics of 2028
Please
in LA.
take
Right
me,
there.
please
I
take
can't
me.
wait to tune in and hear. Okay, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for listening. We've got much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we will be back tomorrow, maybe talking about tennis, but maybe not. Have a great Monday.
Happy Monday, everybody.